The blood wouldn't come. I pressed the blade harder. I knew exactly where the vein was. 20 years as a police officer, I'd seen enough. But nothing happened. Just a thin red line that sealed itself shut almost immediately, like my body was mocking me. I tried again. Deeper this time. Same thing. I put the knife down and stared at the ceiling. I'd been in the Sahara for 9 days. I hadn't had real water in 4. My skin was peeling off my arms in sheets. My tongue felt like a strip of dry leather in my mouth. On the wall behind me, scratched in charcoal, were the last words I'd written to my wife. I lay back and waited to die some other way instead. But let me go back to where this actually started. The race. My name is Mauro Prosperi. I'm a police officer from Rome, and in April 1994, I was 39 years old, in the best shape of my life, standing at the starting line of the Marathon des Sables, the Marathon of the Sands, with 133 other athletes who had also, apparently, lost their minds. 6 days, 156 miles, self-supported through the Sahara Desert. You carry everything on your back. Water is rationed at checkpoints. You sleep in Berber tents at night. And before the race begins, you fill out a form specifying where you want your body sent if you die. I signed it without blinking and wrote down our home address in Rome. My wife Cynthia had watched me train for this for months, 25 miles a day, deliberately cutting my water intake to train my organs for dehydration, studying maps of southern Morocco until I had them memorized. She stood at the kitchen window at 5 in the morning and watched me disappear into the pre-dawn darkness for another run and shook her head. She thought I was insane. She wasn't entirely wrong, but I wasn't there to survive the race. I was there to win it. And when the gun went off on April 10th, under a sky so blue it looked painted, that was the only thing in my head. Days 1 through 3, flying. The heat hit like a wall from the very first mile, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The kind of heat that presses down on you, that you have to push through with every step. I pushed through it. The dehydration training had worked. My body handled the conditions better than I expected. I pulled away from the pack early and stayed there, finishing each stage in the top 10. By the end of day 3, I was in 7th place overall, exactly where I wanted to be. At night, I taped my blisters in the tent, ate my freeze-dried rations, talked late into the night with the other runners. Serious athletes from all over the world. The atmosphere was incredible. Giovanni, the friend who had convinced me to enter, was a few places behind me, and we checked in at every checkpoint. Everything was going to plan. I went to sleep on night 3 thinking about how to move further up the standings the next day. Day 4, the wall. Day 4 was the monster stage, the longest in the entire race, 57 miles between camps. By noon, I had already covered 30 miles. I stopped at the 3rd checkpoint, grabbed my water ration, 2 liters for the remaining 27 miles, and drank 1/3 of it immediately. Giovanni was there. He taped a blister on my foot, we talked about pace, I stood up, and I kept running. It was exactly noon on April 14th, 1994. 20 minutes later, I glanced to the west, and the horizon had turned yellow. Not the yellow of the sand, a different yellow. A dirty, churning, moving yellow. It hit me like a wall of wet cement. 1 second, the dunes in front of me were clear. The next second, the world was gone. The wind knocked me clean off my feet. Sand filled my eyes, my nose, my mouth. I tried to breathe and got a mouthful of grit. Visibility dropped to absolute 0. I genuinely could not see my own hands stretched in front of my face. The briefing before the race had been very clear about this. If a sandstorm comes, stop. Get down, wait. I looked around. I could just make out the other runners dropping to the ground, pulling out their emergency blankets, curling up. And I thought, this is my chance. While everyone else stops, I keep moving. I open up a gap on the field that nobody can close. So I kept running, head down, into the wind for close to 8 hours, running nearly blind through a wall of sand. When the storm finally died, I stopped and looked around. No flags, no runners, no trail markers, no checkpoints. The storm had rearranged every dune around me into a completely different landscape, like someone had picked up the desert and shaken it. I pulled out my compass. It pointed north, but north was just more sand, stretching to the horizon in every direction. That's when I understood. I was lost. Truly, completely lost. Not took a wrong turn lost. Lost in the middle of the Sahara Desert, alone, with 1 liter of water and no idea which direction led back to the race. Day 5. The Flare. I made camp in a hollow that night, built a small fire from a sparse desert bush, and forced myself to think clearly. Search parties would be out at dawn. I had just over 1 liter of water and enough food for 3 days. This was still solvable. At first light, I heard it. A helicopter. Somewhere to the northwest, low altitude, moving toward me. I dropped everything, grabbed the emergency flare gun, standard equipment for every competitor, aimed it straight up, and fired. The flare was the size of a pen. A tiny red pinprick against the blinding white Saharan sky. I watched it. Then I pulled out my Italian flag and started waving it over my head with both arms, screaming, jumping. The helicopter kept coming. It was close enough that I could make out the pilot's white helmet in the cockpit. It flew right over me. Didn't slow down, didn't turn. Just passed overhead and faded until the sound was gone. I stood there in the sand with the flag hanging from my hands. I had 1 flare. I had just used it, and the pilot never saw me. I started walking. The Shrine. By midday, something appeared on the horizon, a dark shape. I squinted at it, waiting for it to dissolve the way mirages do. It didn't dissolve. I walked toward it for what felt like an hour. It grew slowly into a small stone building with a domed roof. No windows, no door. Inside, carvings covered every wall. Arabic calligraphy, religious symbols. The floor was stone, cool in the shade. After hours in 120-degree heat, stepping inside felt like stepping into another world. A marabout. An Islamic shrine, centuries old. A place of prayer for people who were lost. I almost laughed at that. I climbed to the top of the dome and tied my Italian flag to the highest point. Green, white, and red against the yellow sky, visible from miles in every direction. Then I went inside, set up my sleeping bag in the corner, and took stock of what I had. Less than 1 liter of water. Food for 2 days. The arithmetic was simple and terrifying. The bats. I was lying on the stone floor that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to slow my breathing and conserve whatever moisture was left in my body. Then something fell. It landed a few inches from my head with a soft, papery thud. I turned my flashlight toward it. A bat. Small, dark, wings folded against its body. It was still alive, but barely moving, weakened by the heat, probably. It just lay there on the stone floor, blinking. I picked it up and held it in my palm for a moment. Then I looked up. The entire ceiling was covered in them. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Tiny bodies hanging from the stone, shifting slightly in the dark, their wings occasionally catching the light. I looked back down at the one in my hand. Something came over me. Not panic, not disgust. Something colder and more practical than either of those things. I was a man who needed liquid to stay alive, and I was holding liquid. I took out my knife. The blood was warm and salty. There wasn't much, a few milliliters, but I felt it hit my throat, and something in my body responded immediately, like a machine that had been running on fumes, finally getting a drop of fuel. I looked back up at the ceiling. I went to work. Over the next 2 days, I caught around 20 of them. I learned quickly. A fast swipe, pin them before they can bite, one clean cut. I drank the blood and ate what meat and fat I could. I buried the remains outside the shrine every time because it felt wrong to leave a mess in a place that was giving me shelter. I'm not sure I can explain that logic, but it mattered to me at the time.
The knife. On the 6th day, I sat in the shrine and thought about dying. Not in a panicked way, methodically, like a man solving a problem. In Italy, families of missing persons don't receive government benefits until a body is found. If I simply vanished in this desert, Cynthia and the 3 kids could be waiting years. But this shrine, this was a known place. Locals visited it. If I died here, someone would come eventually. They'd find me. The pension would be paid. The kids would be okay. I took the knife out and looked at the blade for a long time. First, I scratched something into the wall with a piece of charcoal from my burner. I wrote, "I hope you will forgive me. I love you, Cynthia." I set my race bib on the stone floor beside me, the number I'd pinned to my shirt on the starting line 4 days ago, in another life. I took off my shoes and looked at my feet. The blisters had long since split open. The soles were raw and weeping. I'd been so dehydrated for so long that the skin on my arms was starting to flake off in sheets, exposing red, burned flesh underneath. I put the blade to my wrist. And that's where we came in. The blood wouldn't come. Too thick, too dried out. My body had been hoarding every last drop of moisture and wasn't about to give any up, not even to let me die. I lay back on the cold stone and closed my eyes and figured dehydration would finish the job on its own. I'd just wait. When I woke up the next morning and opened my eyes and saw the bats still hanging on the ceiling and the sunlight coming through the entrance, I lay there for a long moment. If I can't die, I thought, then I have to live.
Walking. I taped my shoes back onto my feet, packed what little I had left, wrapped a scarf around my face against the sun, looked out the entrance of the shrine at the mountains on the horizon. Distances in the Sahara are deceptive. The air is so clear that things look much closer than they are. Those mountains could be 10 miles away or 50. But mountains mean water. Water means people. I walked out of the shrine and didn't look back. As I moved, I dropped pieces of equipment behind me. A food wrapper, a piece of tinfoil, a spare shirt, breadcrumbs, just in case anyone was following my trail. Later, I found out the search party had found some of these. They'd also found the shrine, the bat bones, the charcoal marks, my flag still on the dome. By that point, they were searching for a body. Back in Rome, Cinzia had found out I was missing from a newspaper. Not from the race organizers, from a newspaper, same as everyone else. Her brother and brother-in-law had flown to Morocco.
Interpol resources were involved through my police connections. The Moroccan military had trackers out. And somewhere around day 6, the search team had told Cinzia something she later said was the worst thing she had ever heard. No one had ever survived more than 4 days in the Sahara without water. She heard that on day 6. I had at least 4 more to go.
Days 8 to 9. Hunting. I moved only in the early mornings and early evenings when the heat dropped to something survivable. The rest of the time, I found shade, a boulder, a rock ledge, a depression in the sand, and I waited. I hunted. I made a slingshot from sticks and a piece of elastic from my pack and killed a mouse with it. I found a snake and killed that too. I found bird droppings and ate those. I scraped moisture from the roots of sparse desert grasses. By this point, my weight had dropped so much that my clothes hung off my body like they belonged to someone else. My eyes had sunk into my skull. Later, when I finally caught a glimpse of my own reflection, I understood immediately why a small child who saw me would scream. On day 9, I smelled it before I saw it. Water. A damp depression in the dry bed of an ancient river, the kind the locals call a wadi. Water had collected between the rocks, warm and cloudy and tasting of salt and sand and everything. I dropped to my knees and put my face straight into it. I drank too fast and vomited immediately. I made myself stop, counted, took one small sip and waited, took another, filled my one remaining plastic bottle with the murky liquid and kept moving. That evening, I found goat droppings. Dry pellets scattered between rocks. I crouched down and stared at them. And something rose in my chest that I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Goats don't survive in this environment without humans, which meant humans were close. Day 10. The girl. I followed the droppings. Then I found barefoot footprints pressed into dried mud. My heartbeat picked up. I started moving faster, then running, actually running for the first time in days, ignoring everything my feet were telling me. I came over a dune and stopped. A small herd of goats grazing among the rocks, and behind them, a girl, maybe 8 years old, in light-colored robes and a headscarf, watching the animals. She saw me and went completely still. I knew what I looked like, a walking skeleton in rags, skin blackened from the sun, eyes sunk into my skull. I raised one hand slowly. I tried to smile. She didn't run. She called out in Arabic, and a few minutes later, adults appeared from behind the rocks. A man, a woman, other children. A Berber family, nomads. They spoke Arabic. I spoke Italian. Didn't matter. The woman took one look at me and went for goat's milk. I sipped it. My stomach heaved, and I vomited almost immediately. The family looked at each other and made a quiet decision. They put me on a camel. By evening, Algerian soldiers had arrived. An Italian who'd crossed a live minefield along a heavily monitored border was suspicious enough that they blindfolded me and drove me to a military base. The interrogation lasted about an hour before someone burst into the room and put the pieces together. He told me where I was. Tindouf, Algeria, 180 miles from where I had disappeared in Morocco. The hospital put 16 liters of fluid into me intravenously that night. My liver was failing. My kidneys were shutting down. My corneas were burned from days of sand and sun. The doctor said I was within a day or two of dying. I weighed 99 pounds. On the evening of April 24th, Cinzia put the kids to bed, and the phone rang. She picked up. "Did you have a funeral for me yet?" She dropped to the floor. Recovery took nearly 2 years. My stomach had shrunk so severely that solid food made me sick for months. The liver damage was permanent.
I had leg cramps for over a year. The doctors almost amputated my feet. They managed to save them. In 1995, a documentary crew went into the desert and found the shrine. Inside, bat skeletons, charred remains of my gear, and on the wall, scratched in charcoal, my message to Cynthia. The Italian flag still on the dome. 3 years after all of this, I went back to Morocco and ran the Marathon des Sables again. A journalist asked me why. I always finish my races, I said. I finished in 12th place. I ran it 8 more times after that. The last time was 2017. I was 62 years old. The race now requires all competitors to carry military-grade high-visibility flares. A change made directly because of what happened to me in April 1994. A pen-sized flare against a Saharan sky isn't enough. I know that better than anyone.